Other than the podcast itself, the best way to stay in touch with our various goings-on is to be on our mailing list. To sign up, go to spotlightonpodcast.com and click on Newsletter. Thanks. Hello and welcome to Spotlight On, the podcast featuring musicians, writers, innovators, and ideas shaping music, arts, entertainment, and culture. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. Today the spotlight shines on Six Missing, the musical project of ambient artist TJ Dumser, who creates music that helps us connect with the present moment in ways we often forget. After encountering an intense period of burnout, TJ turned his mental health struggles into Gentle Breath, a dark, lush EP that marks a new direction for this Austin-based artist. It's music that explores uncertainty with stunning depth. Think Tangerine Dream meeting the cosmic GAS records, but with TJ's own distinct voice shining through. TJ's journey from New York workaholic to finding inner calm through his compositions offers a powerful look at how music can heal. His project name even comes from a supernatural experience at a Revolutionary War battle site. And now, TJ Dumser. When I was doing my research for our time together, I saw that we both lived in Astoria at the same time.
Oh, really?
Wasn't there very long, about 2 years, ending in the summer of 2016.
Oh, okay. So I think I had gotten there 2013. Oh, that's awesome. Where were you in Astoria?
It's actually at two different ends. I spent a lot of time on 38th. I think it was near the corner of 34th Ave, right off of Steinway, sort of in the area near where the studio was and Museum of Moving Image, that end.
Oh, yeah.
And then I had a place at the other end on, I think it was 36th, just off Astoria Boulevard, between like Astoria Boulevard and I think it would have been 28th Ave.
Oh, so your second location was very close to our second location. We were 36 between, do you know where Single Cut was? The brewery over there by any chance? Like it was more towards Con Ed, actually. So I was like a block away from Con Ed. So when that thing exploded that year, do you remember that? When it all turned blue and the sky turned blue, we were like across the street from it. And we were like, we're either going to die or we're going to get awesome superpowers. So I was kind of like hoping for the latter. But yeah, it was a good time living in Astoria. It's a good neighborhood.
Yeah. Do you get back there?
No, not so much. We went back to Astoria specifically once in the last like 5 years. And it was right after things had settled from the pandemic and people were feeling more okay about being out in the world and being around other people again. And we went home to see family and we obviously flew into, it was JFK, and we drove through the old neighborhood and saw our old place, and it was great. I mean, I miss Astoria. I miss New York a lot.
Yeah, me too.
Where are you now?
I am just south of Seattle.
Oh, so you went real other coast.
Yeah.
Gotcha. But that's still like a good city though, right?
It's like it's a city.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fine. I don't love Seattle as a city, but I love the region. It's very beautiful. I always tell people you can go 20 or 30 miles in any direction and be in a different topography. You want mountains, you want snow, you want ocean, you want island.
Yeah.
In that regard, it's beautiful. But the city itself to me it's not New York, and nothing is, but.
I mean, you're speaking my language entirely. I can get very poetic and romantic about New York. I grew up in Westchester, and like my dad grew up in the Bronx. So I'm like New Yorker through and through. And I only went away to college. I went to Full Sail it was a 12-month program at the time I went in 2005. And so I was only away from New York and home for a year and change. So I spent most of my professional life, most of my adult life in New York. And I don't know, like being in a creative field and being like a freelancer, being a musician, being around that energy that's just like imprinted into the cement and every building and you're amongst so many other people it's the hardest place in the world to live. But when you succeed there, it's so inspiring to you. And to me, at least, it was like, wow, I'm doing this thing.
Yeah.
And there's just every other person on the street is going through that same thing together. I never felt alone, even though I was mostly like solo through the city. You can be amongst so many people, but be in such your own lane, your own bubble, having your own day. And being in Austin, I don't have that at all, like at all. It's a pocket city. Nobody walks anywhere. There's a lot more ease to a lot of ways of life. And so over the past like 4 or 5 years, I've had to figure out what my fuel is again. I would imagine maybe you feel a similar way. Like I've been to Seattle a couple of times, haven't spent like any real amount of time there. Been to Portland a good deal of time. So like Pacific Northwest is awesome, but it's got a different vibe altogether from the city. Like it's a different thing.
Yeah. It's interesting your point about being alone and amongst people. When I first moved to New York, it was in the mid-90s, and I lived on the Lower East Side. Just really special moment in time. But I didn't really know anybody. And I spent so much time wandering around Chinatown and East and West Village and just walking, going into restaurants by myself. And I realized that being alone, but being around the sound of people was really nourishing. Like I really enjoyed the solitude and the time to think, but also the human energy was enough. I didn't need it directly. It was nice to be able to feed off of it. And it's really where I grew to appreciate and cultivate people watching or just sitting alone and having a meal with a magazine or a book. Like I'm really grateful I learned how to do that.
Yeah. I mean, even as you're talking, I'm getting like emotional just thinking about this because it's, we're at the end of the year here. So it's a natural time to kind of like pause and reflect and think back on your past year and growth or not, and change or not. And so thinking about life in the city and who I became, I attribute all of that to living in New York, existing in New York, because also at the drop of a hat too, you can be completely and totally alone on the street. And that is magic as well. I mean, how could that possibly be? You're in this city of millions of people and you turn one corner and you're on a block by yourself. There's just so much happening at all times in New York. And yeah, I just really loved it. I think it would be a dream to go back in a different way, I think, than we were existing before we left. And maybe it's the type of thing where you got to leave it to come back to it. Because I also know like there were days there where I was like, I understand, I get why people freak out and like just lose their mind here because like there's so much pressure at all times. So I totally get it. So I definitely needed to leave it, I think, to reappreciate everything that it has and holds. Yeah, it's interesting that you are feeling the same thing. We left 3 weeks before the pandemic. So our timing was like, we were laughing about it. Not like, haha, this is funny, we did it, but kind of like, are you kidding me? We would have been in this position 3 weeks later because we were in a 2-bedroom apartment in Astoria, shared building. It was like one of those old kind of like tissue box houses type of things. And we would have not had enough space to go through it. But yeah, we were here. We still had boxes unpacked and we were listening to The Daily on NPR. And I was like, I think this might be an issue. I think this thing they're talking about might be a problem.
Wow.
And then 3 weeks later, it was just bam. Yeah. So really crazy. But you remarked on the room and I don't know, life's so weird because like I would not have had the ability to do this in New York on the timeline that I did here. Probably would have taken a lot longer to do it there.
Can you articulate or can you observe or maybe can you debunk what I'm about to say? Do you think that there's a connection between physical spaciousness and the spaciousness in the Six Missing music, especially the new record or the new EP?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what I have tried to do and what I think has been an interesting side effect of leaving New York is like manufacturing that for myself. So that feeling of the chaos, the outward noise, the kind of the speed and pace at which New York City moved forced me naturally to go kind of inward and find that calm. and find that place of, like I said before, I really felt that like just I'm in my own bubble here and I can kind of observe it all from the safety of being almost stepping out of the stream. Moving here to Austin, I lost a lot of that natural inward time. So I think what I tried to do with the music, either subconsciously or not, is allow for myself to find that space again, because I've been lacking it. It let too much of the anxious thoughts, the obsessive thoughts, it let too much of that have too much room in my space. So I had to manufacture it for myself. And how I did that was just moving Six Missing at such a pace over the last few years, was writing, being very regimented about the releasing. And through doing that, I think, now having the perspective of hindsight, looking back at the last few years, like you just elegantly put, so much more elegantly than I'm explaining right now, is that spaciousness needed to find a new home and find a new way to come out. And it's been coming out in the music as like self-soothing almost in a way, you know?
Well, I mean, that's actually that's a skill that not a lot of people come by naturally, the ability to self-soothe. Like, we don't often talk about it that way, but the inability to do that leads to a lot of potentially problematic behavior, right? Like you're looking for someone else to soothe you or calm you, or there's all kinds of people and things you can take refuge in if you don't have that ability to channel and self-regulate, right? Like it's the root of a lot of destructive tendencies.
Yeah. And I'm happy to dive into that angle of my life a little bit, because I'm 10 years sober this past April.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
I was 5 in May, so we're in the same club.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Congratulations. That's huge.
Thank you.
So then you'll also maybe really sympathize with this, but I think acknowledging that I have addictive behaviors in my life, it's something that I've become more acutely aware of, just because I'm maybe not doing these on the surface more destructive things to me, so drinking, smoking, things like that. It doesn't mean that I'm not an addict. I think that my brain latches on to those things, and that when you latch onto things that are maybe more outwardly acceptable, I see your awards in the back, and I have a few of those too. It's like when we get to do those things and we're awarded for our addictive behaviors of, for me at least, being perhaps a workaholic and pushing myself too hard in that way. It's harder to acknowledge that is also like, hey pal, that's also your addiction, just being like, this is awesome, we're doing really well and we should keep doing this, instead of being like, are you okay? Like, are you burned out? Do you need like a minute here to catch your breath? Being that my life is split in two different ways, like professional being film and TV and commercial advertising, and then music and composition. I think it's funny to see how the sand gets poured into either bucket. Like when I'm feeling one way in one, how that affects the other one, and vice versa. And I think that the more crazed I've got with the professional side, or more intense, I'll say, the music has taken on a different form Like it goes kind of, the pendulum swings in the other way, which is like, it's my refuge. It's my respite. It's my place where I don't receive notes and feedback and meetings and all this stuff. This is for me. And when that thing ticks up a little bit, I notice, okay, maybe work isn't as high of a priority. So it's like this fine dance, continually just being a human being, but then also having that added layer of being an addict in so many ways, you know?
Yeah, it finds its way out. It finds its way to manifest. Yeah, it's definitely true. And even if some of the other ways it manifests don't initially seem problematic, like you said, like you end up in a similar place in terms of drawn energy. You talk about burnout, or, there's plenty of people who, I tried to quit drinking years ago, but I did it on my own. So I white knuckled for a couple of years. And before I knew it, I was compulsively eating, or, just other things. You can't, it's not like it only wants to manifest in one way. It'll find the way to sprout its head,
Yeah. I was actually going to ask you if you were open to talking about it, like, yeah, what you went through and kind of how you arrived at the point of being like willing to stare at the issue.
Like my bottom.
I'm curious. I tried programs before and they didn't vibe for me. So I more or less did what you did, white knuckle it. But I'm always so curious to hear what other people's perspective or journey through that was, just because I think it's good to know.
Yeah, I'm probably overly comfortable talking about it. So it's just fine. For me, it was definitely always alcohol, although there were other things involved along the way, but that was really my thing. And it started relatively young as a teenager. For a long time, it's almost embarrassing to talk about because it feels so stupid now, but it was a big part of my identity, like being a drinker and being the one that could keep going. And it was wrapped up in my ideas about masculinity. My dad was kind of a guy's guy. He was a cop. He drank, and I just thought it's like, that's what men did. And so that's what I did. But I also always had, I would say, lowercase d depression, and just a lot of noise in my head, a lot of negative thought patterns and obsessive negative thought patterns, and some social anxiety. And so for years, the alcohol was medicinal in a way. It allowed me to feel comfortable in my own skin. But I tell people, when it stopped being medicinal, it turned poisonous.
Yeah.
And once it turned poisonous, it was a pretty rapid switch. And so in 2011, a friend of our family committed suicide while we were on vacation. And I was drinking pretty heavily. I basically just drank all the time. Like, people didn't really perceive me as drunk. I just drank all the time. I remember thinking, like, I could walk off a subway platform. I was in a really dark headspace, and I was thinking, one of these nights, the alcohol is going to lower my inhibition and I'm going to do something stupid. And so I quit. And I quit for like 2.5 years. But like I said, I didn't really do anything else. I did some talk therapy, but I wasn't really I wasn't in it. And so ultimately I picked it back up, moved out here. Really what happened was I was running really hard professionally, really hard, traveling a lot, and just living a lifestyle that was really, but like, going hard. I was working in a startup environment, and it just became untenable. Like, it just, I don't have a specific tale to share in terms of, it wasn't just impacting me, it was impacting my relationship. And I couldn't tell the difference between the feelings from the alcohol and my actual, I don't want to say mental illness, but my psychological state. And so I had to stop in order to figure out what was cause and what was effect, and really get behind what was going on. And so I went to a meeting. Like, the day I stopped, I went to a meeting, and it was the first time I had thought about the program, because I always had these ideas about what it was. Like, I'm not like those people.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, of course.
Turns out I was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We share a lot in common. Yeah.
And I kind of approached it like, I'm not going to try to find the faults in it. I think that's, a lot of people bounce out of it because they're put off maybe by the God thing. And like, as an atheist, I just said, I'm just going to set that aside. Like, I'm not going to worry about that. So I didn't shoot holes in it. I just went and was like, and I shut up and I listened for a while. And early on, I met somebody who said, it's really simple. don't drink today. Get the book, read the book, get a sponsor, do what he says. I was like, all right, I'll do that. And it helped. I'm probably not as attendant to my sobriety as some other people are. Like, I don't go to a ton of meetings. I like smaller meetings. I like men's meetings, but I don't go constantly. But I do other work. I really like the compulsion was definitely lifted. I don't really think about it. I still, like a lot of people I've heard from, I still have dreams once or twice a year where like I have an alcohol dream and it's really weird. Like it's somehow I'm drinking or I'm I don't know, just alcohol's thematically in the dream, but it never results in like me feeling like I would need to or want to. So I feel lucky.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I think it's just means a lot to like hear that and share that space with you. That's really fascinating about the dream. I only just recently had a dream where I was drinking in it, and I knew in the dream, I was like, I'm feeling bad about this. I know I shouldn't be doing this. I'm letting myself down. I'm letting my wife down. But like you, yeah, there was a certain point along the 10 years where I didn't think about it anymore. And I don't think about drinking in the same way I ever did. And I don't have a craving. I don't see people or I don't feel triggered by it. And I think that's very fortunate. But I think that the thing that I'm wondering with now, 10 years later, is like, I never did the meetings. I never had a sponsor. I just decided it was done. And I don't think I addressed a single underlying issue of the reasons which I echo what you just said, almost to the word. I mean, my story is very similar to yours. I had high levels of social anxiety, depression, and alcohol stepped in to be that buffer in a lot of ways, to help me feel like I could human today. So of course, I loved it. It's like, so great. Oh, wow. I can make this stuff stop for a little while. I can make it quieter. I can make it feel more relaxed.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing that I realized when I stopped drinking was even within my group of friends, which were bandmates, music, bars, playing in bars, playing shows in New York City for no money, but getting drink tickets. Even when I stopped at that point and looked around, I was like, oh, wow, people don't have the same issue as me in that way. Like people don't drink as much. Like when you're drinking and you're drunk and you're in that kind of glow, you feel like everybody's on the same page as me. But like I could then have that perspective to look back and be like, oh no, I was that person at the party. I was that guy that everybody else was looking at being like, whoa, he's messed up.
You mean you weren't the charming talker? You weren't the charming raconteur?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Oh my goodness. I know. But when I got that perspective, I think then that was where I was like, okay, I've had enough. Had enough of this. This is just a mess. And I had all my sneaky ways and I had all my stuff and I knew which, booze shop to go to on which day because I knew the person working behind the counter wouldn't judge me because I was just there yesterday and blah, blah, blah. Like I had the whole map. Yeah, it's so funny. I mean, we're both ex-New Yorkers, both alcoholics. Like it's interesting to think of it through the lens of why maybe I miss New York so much is also because like, again, just that I say this to my wife all the time, is I need my bike to have some resistance on it, so to speak. Like I can't just free spin because it's not good. It doesn't get me anywhere. And I just expend all my energy with nothing to show for it. So I need the bike to have like, the gears engaged and I have to have some resistance on the bike for me to push against to move forward. Yeah, not looping it back around to the music, but that's what I think that's how I've been like creating that for myself, not in New York City.
We'll be back with more Spotlight On and TJ Dumser right after this break.
After listening to this episode, head to thetonearm.com, our new online journal covering unexpected music and culture. This week on The Tone Arm, author Carrie Baker discusses his book On the Corner and the history of busking and street music. Electronic music producer Pesner reveals his latest project, scoring Seattle's historic Can-Can Cabaret. And Lawrence Purrier revisits the most listened to episodes from Season 4 of Spotlight On. You'll find all this and more on The Tone Arm. And while you're there, be sure to subscribe to our email newsletter. That's thetonearm.com. The Tone Arm, putting a needle on the cultural wax.
And now, back to Spotlight On. I have some specific questions about how this relates to the music, but because I had that sort of 2.5 year period in New York when I wasn't drinking, like I know I can live in New York. To me, New York does not equate drinking. I don't feel at risk when I go back. And I think that the more time I get under my belt, the more it actually makes me want to go back, because I would love to have the experience again, more clear-headed. Not that it wasn't wonderful. I mean, it was a good run, but especially this time of year, I harbor this very irrational fantasy of living in New York from, let's call it like October 1st through New Year's, because to me, that's just the most beautiful time of year to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And romantic, and
it's perfect.
And then
it's perfect.
Around January 1st or so, going maybe to, I don't know, Palm Desert or Marina Del Rey, Southern California. Yeah, or Austin, staying there till maybe Memorial Day, and then coming up to the Pacific Northwest, because quite honestly, for all my cracks about Seattle as a city, there's nowhere more beautiful in North America for July, August, September than up here. I mean, the weather is just, doesn't rain, it's temperate, it's sunny, there's so much activity to do. So that's my aspiration.
Oh, I love that. I love that so much. And I feel the exact same way, except I would probably, because I live in Austin, I would probably do the 6 month and 1 day type of thing, like reverse snowbird type of situation, where I would want to go. So I get seasonally depressed in the summer. I always have, even growing up in New York. I hate it. I hate the summer. I hate the long days. I hate the bright sunshine.
Wow.
It just makes me feel terrible. Like the smell of grass is the worst thing in the world. I'm such an indoor cat. I'm such like a gloomy weather person. I'm such a shorter days type of person, because I can get a lot done in a short amount of time.
You should be here. This is like nirvana to you.
Trust me. If I was 10 years younger and not married, I would be out there in a heartbeat. But I do have another person to think about. And we're kind of the polar opposite in that way. My wife loves the sunshine, is not a fan of the heat as we experience here in Austin. But yeah, too many rainy days and she gets a little squirrely. Yeah, so your plan sounds great, except I'd probably do May to January 2nd, and then in New York, and then come back down here for the winter months, because there is something in New York where the winter goes on, it overstays its welcome for like 2 to 3 weeks. And you're like, okay, this is bad. This is terrible. We're in the black slush and it is dark and all the Christmas lights are down and it's just freezing on the subway platform. So like, I will give my wife that at least, but,
What was your relationship with ambient music before Six Missing? Was it something that you were a fan, student, participant? Is this your first foray into the field?
Yes, is the short answer. I had never really grew up listening to ambient music. I was a big fan of soundtracks, and I think that was maybe the primer to ambient music. I really loved film scores. Even as a kid, I would get the cassette or the CD of the original soundtrack to the movies that I really loved, and I would play them and I'd listen to them and I'd like play the movie in my head, or I'd act out action stuff in my bedroom. Like I always really loved how music created a mood and a vibe and how it could change my perspective of what was happening in my life. So like one of my favorite things to do when I was in New York was pop on headphones and just listen to like a score, a soundtrack, and kind of float through the streets and see how that changed how I was experiencing my day. And then I got sick. I got the flu once and I was at work and I had a fever. I don't go down very often. And this was taking me down and I had to go. And this is before COVID, obviously, where people just showed up to work because we had to be there. And like, you're sick? Okay, just stay in your room.
That's what you did.
Yeah. So I was real sick and I threw in the towel and I put in my headphones. I was waiting for the subway and I shuffled. I was like, I had seen Risky Business recently and Tangerine Dream did the score to a lot of that film. I was like, I don't really know them though. Like I want to check them out. So I put on Tangerine Dream's Phaedra, and between my fevered state and kind of the just ambient world that record created, I was like in this magic moment of in between reality and dream worlds. And I was like, holy shit, this is incredible. What is this? This track is like 18 minutes long and like, wow, this is fantastic. It goes to these places. It's hypnotic. It's mesmerizing. It does everything that a film score does, but like with synths and guitars and effects. And being that I was a musician and am, like, I was just hook, line, and sinker in on that. So that was kind of the thing that blew the top off the box for me with ambient music. And then I went to the classics like Brian Eno, Harold Budd, Paul Horn, Suzanne Ciani, Wendy Carlos, like all of these just giants in the world. And I was like rediscovering, it was almost like discovering the Beatles for the first time, being like, wow, there's so much here. That was what got me into it. Always been a fan of like jam stuff, jam bands, and having those long extended periods of instrumental stuff. So it would just ticked all the boxes for me as a musician in my very weird niche of check boxes. So that was kind of like the moment that it happened. And it was, yeah, I can remember clear as day. It's like one of my favorite records. It's just so cool.
All right. So you brought it up. Who were your jam bands?
So my very first concert and I assume it's a safe place to talk about this. So the very first place I ever smoked weed was at a Widespread Panic concert on Halloween at Madison Square Garden. It was insane. It was really crazy. So I started with Widespread and never really got into them, but then found Allman Brothers and Grateful Dead and Fish and Government Mule. And I did that whole kind of like festival scene for a good long while where it couldn't be jammy enough. Like it take me on a ride and let me go. Like I love it. So I guess not to be totally boring, but you know, the classics, I guess. How about for you? Do you partake?
I'm very heartened by your answer because I was very prepared to do some heavy judging. So,
oh, okay.
But I come at it through I was a Deadhead, and then and the Allman Brothers. The Allman Brothers in particular were a very important band for me. I just love them so much, and the Dead for a long time, and Widespread early on. I haven't seen Widespread probably since the 90s, but
yeah.
But I used to really like them. There was something about their edge. You know, they were a little kind of rough around the edges.
Yeah. Totally.
I'm okay with Fish. Like I'm kind of indifferent, I guess I would say, with Fish. I saw them a couple times in the 90s. I wasn't really into the obsessiveness of the fan base. It just didn't feel like, I don't know, it just annoyed me.
You're saying as a Deadhead?
I know.
That's pretty funny.
It's a generational thing.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. I totally get it.
But I did go see the Dead at the Sphere over the summer.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I wasn't going to go. And then my ex-wife and my son bought me a ticket for my birthday. And so I went by myself on my birthday. And
wow.
It was pretty, it was pretty emotional. I found it very moving. I thought it was very well done. It was cool to reconnect with that music because I hadn't seen any of it live in a long time. And obviously it was such a sensory overload that you would have had to like almost put up defenses to not be overwhelmed by it.
Yeah.
It was pretty powerful. It was and it was beautiful. I mean, it was very well done for what it was.
Yeah.
It did make me think like, wow, I would love to see what Brian Eno would do at this place.
I know, right? I saw a lot of clips from people and just on social media of the Dead at the Sphere, and it looked insane. And it did. It really, I mean, I would find it hard to believe that I'd be able to be my younger self on certain substances there, seeing it and not like losing it. It's like, it's a really next level type of experience. And I was going to say on the heels of that, like 90s Fish is like the peak that people hold Fish at. But I actually feel like the videos and the live stuff that I've been seeing of them, of just even this past year that they've been doing, Sphere and Not, kind of like, wow, this is like it's a new band almost. They have this like new energy to them. And so I would say like, give it another shot maybe. But if you can find some of the stuff online, there's some really deep jams that are happening there. And I think like That's what I've always loved about jam bands is like that communication, that listening, that like subconscious connection that the band is having with each other and taking the audience, kind of like lifting them up as well and rising and falling and feeling that like breathing energy that happens at a show, especially with a jam. Like I had a high school teacher who is still a musician, but was a musician. And he turned me on to the Dead in a way that I had never heard it before, because I'd always taken it as surface level. I'm like, okay, they're good, right? And he's like, yeah, but do you hear the nuances, the things that they're calling and responding to each other and how they're signaling to each other within the music and the phrases? And when I heard it through that lens, it was like having a completely new experience and respect for what was happening. So here I am being a lover of being in a band and being a jam band, and now I turn into a total solo artist. Like it's the polar opposite of everything that we're even talking about. It's like the communication that happens is with myself and with machines and all of this. So kind of crave that a little bit every once in a while.
Is your music through composed, or is there a generative or improvisational element to it?
It depends on what I'm feeling at the moment. Like just even this morning, I turned on a synth just out of sight, the Korg Poly 6, because it's one of those things where it's like, I feel like everything is like a living, breathing thing that has like feelings and emotions. And I'm like, I haven't played this in a while. It probably feels bad about itself. I should probably play it and spend some time with it. And I started playing and something started happening. I literally couldn't start recording fast enough. And I was like, oh, wow, that's like the pull that I was feeling towards this thing, because it wanted to be played. And I know I'm getting a little woo-woo, but like, so in that moment, I had no idea what was going to come out, but I'm just kind of running with it now, seeing where that thread goes. I captured it, I put it in the machine, and now I will come back to that improvisational performance either later today or weeks later, in some cases, years later, and come back to it with a different head and take a compositional approach to it. So there's both aspects all the time. And then within the modular Eurorack stuff, there is a generative element to it that I really like and appreciate, because it's throwing curveballs at me that I get to then figure out how to make interesting. And I like that element of it.
Wow.
Before I left the city and I was doing Six Missing, it looked a lot different. It was like improvisational, a lot of guitar, pedalboard, looping things. And I would invite friends, like I'd book a show and then I would just invite friends to come the night of the show to play with me. And we would just do a total free form, like unrehearsed. Like I did a sold out Rockwood set, which I am not tooting my own horn, but I'm just meaning people paid money to come see me. And I invited a friend that I hadn't even seen in 2 years. And we showed up. He showed up 15 minutes before the sound check. And I was like, what's up? What are we doing? So like that element of existing without a net is really thrilling to me. So I try to do that in the studio as much as I can, because it's just so much fun to like feel that feeling and then come back to it with a clearer head, with like your editing brain. I guess like if you're like a writer, you do that maybe sometime, just kind of like get it all out on the page, get all the ideas out, and then come back and figure out like what should stay, what should go, or you just scrap the whole thing, right?
It's really fascinating for me to hear you relate those stories, because I don't really talk about this too much on mic, because it's, these conversations aren't about me, but I had a similar experience with a band I was in the early mid-90s in New Haven. There were 2 or 3 of us that had to be present for us to use the name of the band, but there were nights where we'd be 9 people on stage and sometimes a duo and every configuration in between. but we never played unless we were on stage. And a lot of times, most of us didn't know who was even going to be there. Like one of the guys would just take it upon himself to wrangle a few people. It could be anything from guitar, keyboards, saxophone, trumpet, turntable, drummer, harmonium, like whatever. And very similar to what you were saying, like it would be 15 minutes before we had to do something and somebody would say, let's start in D. And I think that such and such thing was in the news today. So think about that.
Wow. I would have loved to have been in your roster for that because that's exactly, on the way to the stage, we'd do the same thing. I'd be like, I think let's start in B. Let's just see where it goes. And it's interesting that you mentioned that because at the beginning of this, you mentioned being in the meetings and having to overlook the God element of it because of atheism. I'm very similar. I don't necessarily believe in that sort of religious element, trying to put this as nicely as possible. For me, music is my church. It's my everything. So when I would get up and commune with other musicians and other people, I never felt nervous about it. We're going to be a total train wreck in front of these people because we're here communicating together. This whole experience is going to be more or less, at the risk of sounding silly, spiritual. We're really going to go somewhere with it. I would have been, and I still am, that's the type of thing that you were talking about. I would have been so on board to be called up to do a show like that. That's really my bag because it sounds like you take it as seriously as I do. It's a very real thing. It's just great that music exists. My God, it's not to be totally reductive, but thank God for it, really. And it's funny because I don't typically listen to ambient music outside of the music that I create or the music that I work with other people. A lot of the music that I listen to is Beatles. This past summer, I rediscovered my love of 70s AC/DC, which was just pure, unadulterated fun. And I was relearning all the riffs and I was relearning all of Angus's solos and I was watching the videos. Man, there's this great YouTube channel that this guy is using AI restoration to upscale all this old VHS, camcorder footage of early Bon Scott videos on tour. And I'm just God, the energy that is there was just so fun. And it was so nice to not get caught up in the it's 4 chords, verse, chorus, verse, bridge, solo, chorus, out. And it's uncomplicated. It's just so freaking fun. So that's the type of stuff I listen to. And it's funny that it probably influences Six Missing's output in a certain way that is unique to the project. But I'm not totally sitting and queuing up ambient music all day in, day out type of thing.
Yeah, AC/DC is incredible. It's so easy to dismiss them. But it's so...
Of course.
And I've lost touch with them over the last maybe decade or two. I saw them in the 2000s, but I don't, I don't really pay a ton of attention to them.
Mm-hmm.
And probably a lot of people of a certain age, if I'm going to go back to them, it's going to, I probably end at Back in Black.
Mm-hmm.
But my God, it's high art. How they perfected what they do.
Yeah.
It's really stunning, actually. It is stunning.
You can't replicate it. They had such a tightness, such a sound. I mean, those records are Powerage. If you're a musician in a band and you've never heard the record Powerage, what are you doing? Quit, because you don't know what it's like to be in a band until you hear that record. That is the band with microphones in front of them. And the playing is so tight and there are some YouTube videos of isolated tracks from live at Donington of Malcolm. It's insane. It's insane. The man is a machine.
Love those YouTube videos when people do that stuff.
Oh yeah. I mean, we could probably spend a whole hour talking about Angus and Malcolm and all of that, but I completely agree with you. It is high art. And anybody that dismisses AC/DC, come on, get off. It's just, they are the most fun and they're 70 plus and they're going out on tour 2025. That's crazy.
My sole objection with them is I'm not a big fan of Brian Johnson's voice, and it's not great live. It was never a strong voice live, but what, he's like the uncle, like, you know what I mean? Like they're the whole package. Although I do admit to some curiosity about when Axl Rose was their singer. I haven't really seen much video or anything from it. And I'm curious if it was any good.
Yeah.
Because I could actually see that working.
Yeah. I was going to say, I wonder if there's a reason why we haven't seen the video of that, but I agree with you. I heard like how that all came about, right? Like he stepped in last minute for them, and like, how cool, like going from the biggest band of the 80s to the biggest band of the 70s and 80s and 90s. Like, yeah, how awesome that must have been. But I'm not sure. I've seen some videos of Axl lately where I'm a little worried about him.
Yeah.
But
it's really interesting how they've reemerged as like this nostalgia band. And it seems like they can come around every year or two. They were the tail end of my interest in hard rock. In the 80s, I was a bit of a metalhead. I grew up loving like Ozzy and Black Sabbath and the Iron Maiden, like kind of the big dumb rock from the late 70s and early 80s. And then the Dead took over for me. But I've always been very expansive in my musical tastes. I've been lucky that way to have an ear that can appreciate different types of music. Because I don't really think for most people the judgment is qualitative. I think they just can't hear it, because you can train yourself to be able to hear music. And so Guns N' Roses aren't quite in my pantheon the way they are for some people. I understand their importance, but I just don't care as much. But it's really like, if you had said to me 30 years ago, are they going to be touring in 2024? I would have said they're not going to be alive.
I know, right? Appetite for Destruction has some of the coolest guitar solos and lyrical guitar solos on that record that I haven't revisited in a long time. And now that I kind of like remember, and it's been great talking about this, because like I'm totally going to load it up now, Mr. Brownstone and like all this stuff, man. So
it's like a greatest hits record, really.
Totally, right? Like every single track on there. It's almost like Billy Joel's like The Stranger, right? Like every song on that record is like a hit, and you know it because of that record. It's so wild.
In instrumental music, and this music in particular, how do you convey meaning? I go back to something you said earlier about being into scores and soundtracks. Do you use those sort of tropes and cues? Like if you want to say ominous, do you go low on the keyboard and hit a D minor? Like, because clearly you have a lot to express, right? Music is playing a very important emotional function for you. How do you do that in the absence of words?
Phenomenal question, one that I'd be happy to start teasing apart here. I mean, I think for me, I'm lyric blind. So like whenever I've heard music, there are songs that I like have listened to since I'm growing up that I don't know the words to, but I know the music and the bass lines and the melodies and drum fills and all that stuff. So I think that for me, getting into instrumental was a very easy leap in that way. But as far as conveying the emotion, I don't know if I actually know. I think that what I'm trying to do is just like let the boundary between myself and my emotions and my feeling and the recording process be as seamless as possible. And that's why I really like vintage equipment, like synthesizers and things, because I feel like they have a lot of emotion in them as well. And you're putting your hand on a physical knob and you're turning the knob and they're reacting differently to the weather even. Like if it's cold, the synth is tight and it's uptight and it's not loose and it's rigid. So you get a different sound out of it than you do on a warm, humid day where it's looser, it's more rubbery. I'm like, me too, man. Like, me too. I'm different every single day. Let's see how you are today. And so I think that I try to use the tools as a way to convey the emotion. So like it's selecting sounds and vibe curation. Ugh, I can't even believe I said that in that way. That's what it feels like. It feels like I'm designing the sounds to match up to the emotion that I'm trying to kind of convey. And then of course, through words and through writing about it and through videos and Instagram and all of that, trying to maybe give context to it.
What about titles? I ask a lot of artists about that. Like at what stage does a title come into the process, and are the titles meaningful?
I was in a band where we would change the title of the song all the time, and it would get so frustrating. We'd start a session, we'd call it like Dance Shoes. And then like for me, that paints a picture and a color in my head. And everything that I do is within that lens of dance shoes. And then we're going to go and we're going to change it to, actually now it's going to be like velvet suit. I'm like, yeah, but now like what we're doing with that doesn't feel like what I had done was motivated. I actually try to like go with my first instinct and stick with it, because the song title, for me, not a hard, fast rule, but the song title often dictates the vibe that I'm creating. So it's very much tied to it. And it's because it's created like a literal feeling for me, like a visceral feeling, or a color, or just like a lens, a cinematic lens in which I'm seeing what I'm trying to do. So that's a great question. And like, maybe it was also me trying to like go the opposite way of the last band I was in and be like, no, just pick a lane and stick with it.
Are you one of the, are you the type of composer who has the notes app on their phone full of titles? They come across little turns of phrase or things on a menu or whatever, and that's a title waiting to happen.
No, I'm not. I'm very much like the people that don't name their child until they meet him, like that type of person where they're like, we've got some names picked out and type thing. No, I'm very much like, I want to see what it has to say first and then go from there with it. And either, change it midstream or leave it be and never change it again. Because I don't know, I'm a big believer in like your gut instinct, your first instinct being like the one that actually is the right thing, and before your brain gets in the way and starts thinking about something. So I always try to go with whatever my first hit is. Like somebody's offering me a job or an opportunity or something like this. And if my first instinct is like, oh yeah, but then my brain comes in and goes, how are you going to do that? I try to always listen to the gut. So I do that with the song too. If the song says like, it's delicate, that's what it's called.
I've really enjoyed the record. Every once in a while, I come across some work that I feel like, man, this was like target marketed for me.
Oh wow!
Did they pull my profile and make this album for me? I'm on a pretty good jag of both instrumental music and ambient music, and the modular synths do something really special to the somatic experience.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for saying that and for the feedback, and that's really great to know. Because this record in particular felt very personal in that way, and that I was like trying to work through a lot of stuff. And I was worried that that could be potentially off-putting to the listening audience. So I appreciate your feedback, and thanks for spending time with it too. That's really awesome.
Was it successful for you in terms of helping you with the help you wanted from it?
I think so. I don't really see a way in which it wouldn't be. I think it's like good to let stuff go. So even if it's not perfect, even if it wasn't exactly what I wanted to say, thinking back to it now, it's like, it's not fair, because I couldn't possibly be here where I am now, trying to experience where I was then. So I had to trust that what I was doing then in the moment was what was right and what had to happen. So yeah, of course, like it just feels good to put it out and like let it go. And now it's not mine anymore, it's everyone else's, and they'll have their experience with it. And that's the point of it. And that's why making music, making art is just so important and so fun. And that's why I don't know why we would automate joy and automate art with AI. I mean, I get its benefits, but it's just so, I don't know, there's something that happens when you come across something that's crafted by a human being for human beings.
I will say this topic comes up fairly often when I speak with artists, but it's definitely helped me develop this sort of thesis that the music of the late 70s and the early 80s, especially the synth-driven music of that era, we all seem to return to it a lot, and it always seems to come back cyclically. And I'm really of the mind that it's because of the analog nature of the synths. Before everything went fully digital, we still feel, the overtones and the distortion, like the imperfection, the human part of it, the having to turn the dials and press the buttons, like you said earlier. I think that has created a real affinity for people, even like the pre-digital, you mentioned the person that upscans the videotapes. Like there's something very attractive about those weird washed out VHS tapes. And I think it goes beyond nostalgia, because it seems to be affecting people who weren't there the first time. They're just drawn to the aesthetic.
Yeah. And that's a big reason. I mean, I've been using a lot of tape lately, like a lot of reel to reel. And I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine. He's like, you've been doing that a lot with stuff. That seems to be like the magic. sauce, right? And I was like, yeah, it's like, I think that it's because the same way that I find digital photography to be beautiful, I find analog film, 35 millimeter, even movies, 16 millimeter, 8 millimeter, like real film, there's like a depth. There's a depth that you just can't fake, because it's this chemical process of light hitting paper and using a human. It's a surprise to the filmmaker a lot of times what they're going to get in that shot when they develop it. And I think the same thing with tape machines. There's just like this, look, sometimes my power warp fluctuates and the tape goes a little faster and it jumps, and it's like, hey, how cool. Like, this thing is really alive. And there's just a depth you can't really fake. I think you can get really close to it with a lot of this stuff, which is great, because it's talking about prohibitive costs to a lot of these things that are analog in this way, and upkeep and all of that. And somebody just starting out can't spend $3,000 on a reel-to-reel. Like, having a plug-in version of it to get that kind of sound is just as good. But I agree with you. I think that there's an imprint in the music, specifically in the synths. There's like an echo of humanity that people really latch on to subconsciously, that make these things live far beyond their creators.
Thank you so much, TJ Dumser, and as always, thank you for listening to Spotlight On. Spotlight On is executive produced and hosted by me, Lawrence Purrier. We're produced and marketed by Michael Donaldson. Editing and sound design is by Terry Grant. Our theme music is by Q-Burn's Abstract Message. The most important member of our team is you. Thank you for supporting our work. Please rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts, and then visit us online at spotlightonpodcast.com. There you'll find our free episode archive, our online store, and a link to make a donation to support our work. Thanks for listening, be safe, and stay in touch.